Bobby's original book, the horizontal and vertical lines in the background of the illustrations form line charts for determining the distance covered in a given move. The rectangles of the grid measure 1 foot by 2.5 feet. The two horizontal lines in the wall represent the headline and waistline. They show upward and downward motion. From the other lines in the chart, you can gauge the forward and circular motion. The numbered sections on the grid assist in calculating the distance moved. In the videotape we've done to go with the book, we have changed these lines to 1 meter apart and have given you a midline reference on the wall. All this should help you judge the distance moved and the motion used by the wrestlers.
Wrestling is a hand-to-hand contest between two opponents in which each attempts to control the other by placing him on his back with both shoulders touching the mat for a given number of seconds. The techniques used in wrestling have been passed down from ancient times. This video deals with one specific technique, the takedown. The wrestler with a superior knowledge of takedowns has a tremendous advantage. This video demonstrates various takedowns and shows the rewards of knowing these techniques. In each section of the video, you will encounter certain basic principles common to all takedowns. Constant attention to these principles will allow even a beginning wrestler to analyze the most sophisticated takedowns into simple components. The integral components of a successful takedown are the penetration, the setup, and finally the second move or breakdown, which is employed when your opponent has already countered your first move. Too little attention has been paid to both the setup and the second move. Knowledge of one component is insufficient. A successful wrestler must have several setups for his favorite takedown and several second moves that he may use from each setup. One of the most important facets of the takedown is the stance. The objective is to get an overall picture of your opponent without focusing attention upon any particular part of his body. There are three principal stances: the square, the staggered, and the drop step. Bobby's going to cover two of these with you right now and show you how you can successfully move your opponent from these stances.
Okay, the first stance is the square stance where your feet are parallel, knees bent, elbows in. This position, your back's fairly straight, elbows in. You move into your opponent in head-to-head position. The next stance is the staggered stance, 1 foot forward. In this position here, trying to break your opponent's balance.
Penetration is essential to a good takedown. Penetration is moving in the direction of your opponent. This is done by two techniques. On the step in, you shift your weight to 1 foot and step with the other foot in the direction of your opponent. On the drop step, you take a step to place the weight on 1 foot and make a second step in the direction of your opponent with the other foot. Learning to transfer your weight is necessary for a good attack. Bobby's going to demonstrate some penetration drills to help you develop this technique. From a staggered stance, step into a double leg position. Next, move forward to your hands. Push off your front toe and dive forward, sliding on your shoestrings until your forward motion stops on an instant. Drill this technique using an opponent, and upon contact, step up with your back foot for balance. Run on your knees or stand at a 45-degree angle into your opponent. Drill this technique between your opponent's legs. Use the same technique past your opponent's body as he sidesteps similar to a bullfighter. Drill this technique and catch the leg that is moving and stand upward. Drill this technique and catch the stationary leg. your partner, penetrate to double leg position and trip or stand up to finish. Partner drills counters to this technique utilizing a body lock and underhook or front headlock. Counter this technique by blocking the head. Drill countering this technique by blocking the shoulder. Drill stopping the technique by utilizing a collared tie-up. The following are some effective takedown drills. The first, head-to-head with your opponent with your hands locked behind you. Practice stepping into takedown position. Again, head-to-head with your opponent using wrist control. Step into takedown position. While head-to-head with your opponent, using biceps and elbow control, step into takedown position. Head-to-head with your opponent, using a shoulder push, step into takedown position. Head-to-head with your opponent, utilizing neck control, wheel into takedown position. Move your feet, change your levels, see who loses their balance. Head to shoulder, utilizing neck control, move into takedown position. The tie-up is the first step for any setup. Setups are devices that bait your opponent into making technical errors, such as raising his head, pulling back, reaching, or stepping. The tie-up should be made quickly while changing control points to get the opponent into motion. It is best made at a distance that will enable you to keep your elbows bent. Place your feet no more than 2 feet from his. The tie-up should be made by the hands coming from the lap position on the inside of your opponent's arms. Bobby will demonstrate several different tie-ups complete with finishes. While using an underhook overhook tie-up, an effective drill is to move from the underhook to a high inside crotch or from the overhook to a fireman's carry. A variety of attacks can be set up using the 2-on-1 tie-up, as Bobby demonstrates here. The double leg tackle is a flying tackle similar to a football tackle. It begins from a staggered or drop step position. In the first move, your front leg steps between your opponent's legs, or at least in that direction, in an attempt to split his legs with advancing foot. Your head should be on the same side of the opponent's body as your back foot and should lead your body in, while your shoulder makes the first contact with his body. Take a long step to a crouch position so that you are close to the mat with your front knee pointing between your opponent's legs. Your knee should be bent down toward the mat and your chest should be over your knee. Head up and arm in close to the body. All your weight should be on the front foot. At this point, transfer the weight to your toes and dive into your opponent by leaping off the toes of your front foot, flattening your toes beneath you as you leave the mat. Try to hit your opponent with your shoulder, keeping your head up. At the point of contact, your front knee will hit the mat and possibly your back knee will also. Your hands are grasping your opponent's leg with your wrists on the outside of his knees. His knee on your head side must be controlled by pulling it tight to your chest. You are now in position to start your breakdown. From an elbow control, Bobby releases the elbow and quickly hooks over the forearms, jerking them toward his chest, then steps in for the tackle. While his opponent has wrist control, Bobby posts his opponent's wrists up and steps in for the double leg tackle. Bobby attempts to reach for his opponent's head. Upon his opponent's reaction to his reach, he starts to penetrate by moving his hands down and starting his drop step. Pay particular attention to the final penetration and the driving motion that is used to get it. From a double elbow control, as your opponent attempts to free his elbows by pushing you away, you change the position of your thumbs to the inside, and then posting his elbows, change levels and step in for the tackle. This setup is used when your opponent is controlling your elbow. Pulling his opponent's head down, Bobby slips his hands off of the neck, changes levels, and moves into position for the tackle. A drop step is used for penetration. From an elbow and wrist control, Bobby releases the wrist and catches his opponent's opposite wrist, then turns his head and uses his shoulder to knock his opponent's hand off. His opponent counters with a head block. Bobby uses the captured arm as a post to clear the arms while he uses a step in for the tackle. This maneuver is used when your opponent changes from an outside control to an inside position. As he makes this change in position, Bobby opens the palm of his hand and slaps his opponent's elbow across his body, stepping in for the penetration as he does so. From a head and arm control, Bobby applies pressure down towards the mat. His opponent reacts by pulling his head up. When Bobby feels the upward pressure, he releases the head and steps in for a double leg tackle. Bobby's opponent attempts to control his head with a collar tie while on his knees. Bobby executes a post and a drop step and pushes with his head into his opponent's side while stepping up with his outside leg to complete the tackle. From a position of wrist control by both wrestlers, Bobby rotates his right wrist down, then releasing his opponent's left wrist, he takes an arm drag, turning his opponent's body and stepping between his legs. He then reaches across his opponent's body as he lifts his leg off the mat. Breakdowns can be described as second moves that are determined by the position of your opponent's arms and feet after you have made your initial penetration. Bobby's attempted double has taken him to his knees. To finish, he steps up, pushing his head into his opponent's side, thereby forcing his opponent off balance. Bobby attempts to counter his opponent's double leg tackle by using a crossface. His opponent reacts and goes into his second move by controlling the knee. He then finishes by sitting through. From a double leg tackle position, White is attempting to counter by throwing his legs back. Bobby maintains control of White's left knee. By pulling his knee toward the mat, dipping his own right shoulder and lifting White with his left shoulder, Bobby forces White to the mat. He then steps over to assume his righting position. White's double leg tackle has taken him to his knees. He then steps up and behind Bobby's leg with his outside leg, driving with his chest as he trips with his foot. This knocks Bobby off balance and to the mat. Bobby is on his feet in a double leg tackle position. His opponent is attempting to counter with a crossface. Bobby steps in, kicking out his opponent's right leg and throwing him to his back. From a double leg position, Bobby bends his knee, applying chest pressure to his opponent's thigh, thus placing all of his weight on his opponent's right leg. Then, by stepping back, he extends the distance between his opponent's legs while continuing to apply pressure towards the mat. This forces his opponent down. fireman's carry technique is similar to the double leg tackle penetration. You begin with a step between your opponent's legs, placing your head under the arm you are attacking or controlling. Your free arm goes inside his crotch, catching the leg above the knee. The stepping leg goes deep into the crotch, touching the mat in a kneeling position, with your near leg driving and pivoting and also coming to a kneeling position. This pivoting rotation straightens your back, lifting your opponent off the mat as you pull down hard on his captured arm. From this point, take your opponent over your head and throw his shoulder down to the mat. Note you must move to a staggered stance when you start to penetrate, making sure your opponent does not control your head. Place your head on the same side of your opponent's body as the arm and leg you are attacking, catching his arm as high on the triceps as possible. The setup for the fireman's carry is designed to do three things. First, make your opponent step toward you. Second, make your opponent move the arm that you plan to control away from his body. Third, make your opponent raise his head up. The second move for a successful fireman's carry is a throw to the mat. From a staggered stance, Bobby overhooks his opponent's arm and grabs his shoulder. He then moves toward the crotch, attacking the leg, makes his lift, and throws to the mat. Black goes from a double wrist control to an arm drag. White reacts by pulling his arm back, and Black changes from a drag to an overhook. Black catches the arm, penetrates, and finishes the fireman's carry. White reaches to grasp Black's head. White catches the head and moves to his left, pulling the head toward his shoulder in the same direction he is moving. This tie-up is intended to get Black to raise his left arm away from his body. White then releases the head as he hooks the arm and steps in for the fireman's carry. From a staggered stance, Black does a head snap. As White reacts, Black reaches for arm control and begins his fireman's carry while White is straightening up. From a head and arm control, Black forces White's head down. White struggles to free his head. Black allows White to free his head, but maintains control of his arm. Black begins his penetration using a step in and fireman's carry finishing. From a staggered stance, Black does a head snap. As White reacts, Black overhooks White's right arm and steps in for his fireman's carry. White tries to counter Black by whipping Black over. However, Black changes from a fireman's carry to a double leg tackle by attacking White's leg with both hands to finish the takedown. Black's fireman's carry takedown has been countered by White. Black maintains the arm control of the fireman's carry and uses a reverse elbow lock on White's free arm to control both arms. Black begins a sit-through motion, pulling White's left arm toward the mat and forcing White's right shoulder up and to the side. This motion is similar to a roll. Black forces White on his back and drives into White, making White carry Black's entire weight on the chest. Black then scissors his legs and comes out on top. White is positioned on his knees, and Black has placed his hands on White's shoulders with his thumbs in White's armpits. Black then takes a step, pushing White to his feet. As White comes to a standing position, Black releases his right hand and reaches inside the crotch for a fireman's carry. Black finishes with a lift and throw to the mat. White underhooks both of Black's arms and takes a step and squats, placing his head under Black's arm. White then looks up, blocking the arm and reaching behind the leg, at the same time driving across and forcing Black to the mat. From an underhook and wrist control tie-up, Black squats and lifts White's left arm. Black steps forward, lifting the arm, ducking his head under White's arm. Black releases the wrist, looks up to block White's arm, and drives off his right leg, placing himself behind White. Black has assumed wrist control. White has underhooked with his left arm. White then lifts his hand, squats, and steps under Black's arm. White looks up to block Black's arm, catches Black's leg, and drives across, forcing Black to the mat. From a wrist control and collar tie-up, Black attempts a foot kick. As White reacts to the foot kick, Black lifts the wrist and ducks his head under White's arm. Black is controlling White's wrist and elbow. Black lifts White's elbow straight out and pulls it over his shoulder. Black penetrates by stepping with his right leg and reaching for White's thigh with his left arm. Black's knee touches the mat as he pulls up on White's thigh and stands up. From an elbow-controlled tie-up, Black lifts White's elbow as he does a drop step. He pivots his body and moves his left leg between White's legs while going to his knee. Black reaches into White's crotch with his free arm. Note that the penetration is a drop step. From an underhook and wrist tie-up, Black lifts White's shoulder and ducks his head under White's arm. At the same time, Black does a knee dip and reaches for White's leg. Black begins to come to his feet, changing to a double leg tackle. Black assumes a wrist control and overhooks the forearm. Black pulls White's right arm down toward White's opposite knee. As White reacts by pulling his arm back, Black starts his high crotch takedown by lifting White's arm up and pulling it over his shoulder. Black makes his penetration, changing to a double leg tackle. From a wrist and elbow control, Black sets up a high inside crotch takedown by pulling White's right arm down. Black releases White's wrist and reaches inside White's crotch at the same time lifting the elbow. Black then goes into the high inside crotch position and changes to a double leg takedown. From a wrist control and elbow tie-up, Black releases White's right wrist and brings his hand behind White's left wrist while still controlling White's elbow. Black starts to push White's hand toward the mat, guiding the hand past his body. After clearing the arm past the body, Black steps in for the high crotch. Black steps up and changes to a double leg tackle. From an elbow tie-up, Black reaches his free arm for White's left leg. As White reacts by pulling his leg back, Black steps in for the high crotch. Black steps up and changes to a double leg takedown.